Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion of A Most Beautiful Thing. We're so grateful to be here tonight with Mary Mazzio, Arshay Cooper, and Tyler and Cam Winklevoss. All played such enormous roles in putting on this film. I'm also joined tonight by Sam, Conlan, and Clark. We're all representing the 4 Harvard-Radcliffe rowing programs. And we also have Andrew and Trevor McDonald on deck from the Harvard Varsity Club to manage the Q&A feature. So if you have any questions for the panelists, you can dump them in there, and we are hoping to have some time at the end of this hour-long discussion to take any of those questions from the audience. But most importantly, we're so grateful for Arshay, Mary, and Tyler and Cameron for talking with us tonight. I know we've had some great questions from the registration. But first, I was just hoping that each panelist could introduce themselves quickly and just talk a little bit about where you are now, any projects that are up in the air for you. And I guess we could go Arshay, and then Mary, and then Tyler and Cameron.
Hey everybody, Arshay Cooper, author of A Most Beautiful Thing, big part of this film that great Mary Mazzio put together along with some cool producers, Tyler and Cameron. So yeah, no, I am excited. I, still spending my time and most of my days really focusing on diversifying the sport of rowing. It's a journey, it's awesome. We're building a great team around this fund. We started called A Most Beautiful Thing Fund, where we go into neighborhoods like the one I grew up in and expose young kids to the sport of rowing. That's a little bit what I'm working on now.
My name's Mary Mazzio. How's everybody doing? Used to train back in the day out of Wells, so am sort of a townie, if you will, and thrilled to be here. I'm the writer, director, producer of A Most Beautiful Thing, and delighted to be here. I have a company called 50 Eggs Films, and we do documentary films that are really focused on social impact. So some of our work has catalyzed bipartisan legislation. We were able to raise over $100 million with the Obama White House on one film, and then this film with Arshay's leadership and the support of, extraordinary support of Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. I think it's skyrocketing, and we are seeing interest from Hollywood, some like huge Hollywood producers and Hollywood directors. So when you said what's coming up, there's a lot coming up, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, during the course of the hour. So thank you.
Hey there, Tyler Winklevoss. I am the right-handed twin of the Winklevi. I'm Harvard class of '04 to date myself. It feels like it wasn't that long ago, but time sure flies. Cameron and I both rode in the 2008 Beijing Olympics in the men's pair. And most recently, about 5 years ago, we started a cryptocurrency exchange and custodian called Gemini. We're headquartered in New York, and we're almost 300 employees and growing fast. So that's the latest with me. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, guys.
Hey, everyone. Cameron Winklevoss. I don't have a ton more to add because Tyler's CV is pretty much my CV. I should note we won a national championship in '04 when we rode with Harvard. We were very excited about that. And we rode under the legendary Harry Parker, who unfortunately has passed on. But I think he coached at Harvard for something like 55 seasons. And Charlie Butt was in the boathouse. And so we knew Charlie because he was there during our time, and excited to see the program under his stewardship. So thank you for having us, and very happy to be here.
Great, thank you. I think I was going to kick it off with a question for Arshay. I think when you watch this film, it has so many complex themes. I think it's, first of all, just such a powerful story of resilience and the reflection of the crew. But it also involves a lot of the trauma that you guys have endured through, generations of the violence and abuse that you speak of with your families, and also just racism and some discrimination within the sport. And then there's also this kind of, you know, the overarching theme of rowing. And I think I'm just curious, Arshay, in your eyes, what is the most powerful single idea or message that you hope is conveyed through the film? And could it even be about one idea? It seems like so many of those things are kind of interwoven. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, good question. So many different ideas, but I think me, Mary, and the crew are on the same page. And I will quote Mary, the powerful words of Mary is that, you know, talent is everywhere, but access and opportunity is not, you know? And I think that, you know, when you watch the scene and you look at the barbershop where Pooh was basically saying when they tore down the YMCA, we all was in the street. All these kids were hanging out in the streets, right? And every inner city, those things are happening all the time, right? There's no access, no opportunity to different programs. There's not a lot of resources. And so I wanted to show the power of access and opportunity when I've written this book and when we told this story. What happens if you can put a rowing program or entrepreneurship program on the west side of Chicago, and you get more Arshays, Prestons, and Alvins and Malcolms who would love to come back and contribute to the community that gave to them. And that's why I told the story. You know, I always say the biggest lesson I learned in rowing was, you know, that I can't do the work of 8 people, but it takes 8 people to do the work, and we'll get there much faster, right? And I think, you know, and there are communities where there's basically a 4 that's moving to 8. And then there's other communities where 8 is moving to 8. And so how do we get an 8 complete in a community like I grew up in? And that's what I hope to accomplish and get more people involved in creating access and opportunities for more future Arshay, Alvin, and Malcolms.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's such a powerful comment too. I think just thinking about how we recognize talent and who has access are such important questions to ask. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also that all these themes and ideas that you're saying, they really are all focused on social impact, just like Mary was saying that she focuses most of her documentaries on. I think that creates this awesome partnership between the both of you. So going off of that, I would love to ask Mary a question, and I would love to know what inspired you to take on this film specifically, how this project sort of came about, and what was so inspiring to you about this particular story that Arshay created.
Well, I first found out about this story when somebody said, hey, there's this guy, he self-published a memoir about rowing on the west side of Chicago. And I was like, west side of Chicago, right? Like, I've been kicking around the sport for a while. Like, this is, you know, is this fake news? And found his book on Amazon, read it in a minute, and tweeted out to Arshay, at Arshay Cooper, compelling read. And Arshay, I think it was like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later, a tweet comes rocketing back, at Mary Mazzio, you know, blah, 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 blah. And my phone rang probably about 20 minutes later. And, you know, when you meet Arshay Cooper, you are drawn into this vortex of change, of excitement. He is one of the most charismatic, thoughtful people. And so he started to talk to me about what he learned through this sport, this beautiful sport that we all love. And you know, he was one of mine. He was one of my kind, right? And you know what I mean by that. When you're a rower, it's all grit, no glory, right? We all share that genetic piece, that DNA, where we put our heads down and we go. And that was Arshay Cooper. And to be able to tell a story using rowing as just an extraordinary metaphor, right? But to be able to explore the impediments and really racially based, racist impediments that so many people in underrepresented neighborhoods across this country face. And what really struck me was the profound inequality of safety that exists in this country, and really how fundamentally undemocratic that is, right? When we've got young people growing up in neighborhoods that are like, and I know this is not PC to say, but they're third world conditions. They are like war-torn nations, 15 minutes from where each of us live. And so I thought that when Arshay called me, And oh, by the way, Arshay. So I was like, oh, he tweeted, like, I feel so good. I'm so honored. And then Arshay told me 3 weeks ago, he's like, you know, Mary, I was tweeting to like Will Smith. I was tweeting to Martin Scorsese. I was tweeting to Steven Spielberg. You were the only one that took my call. So I took the call, and you know what? Sometimes that's life, right? You're there when the bus comes, or you take the call. And that's how Arshay really took me and so many others on this really extraordinary journey.
That's great, thank you. I think we all have this sort of experience of, you know, meeting rowers or hearing about rowing and sort of being immediately drawn to it because that is what we do and that's what we love. But I also really love that you are also really drawn to the story itself and all the deeper parts of it.
So this is a question for both Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. Thanks so much for coming to talk with us again. The question I have is how both of your perspectives and identities informed how you approached this film. So how did you reflect back on your own life experiences, both as a rower and as a person while you were creating the movie? And what did you learn from the experience?
Yeah, so we first met Arshay in New York at a restaurant. He came up and said hello, and he said, "Hey, I rowed," and immediately there was this bond. You know, hey, you've gone through this crazy sport too. You're immediately brothers. So the power of sport to bring people together is really powerful. We ultimately connected. I said, "Hey, DM me on Twitter. We'll connect it," and we connected a couple of years back. Maybe it was like 4 or 5 years ago. Stayed in touch, further got in touch through the Row New York charity that he was working with. And ultimately, he told us about his book. And then when Mary got on board, we're like, we love this story. This story has to be made. And so we became executive producers. So I think the power of sports bring people together, but also to change people's lives. Our experience is we're two guys who went to private school, came from Greenwich, Connecticut, right at Harvard, and we're devoted to try and move a boat a millimeter more per stroke. And our goal was the Olympics. And that was our experience. But this sport changed lives for us, but also guys on the west side of Chicago, maybe even more so. So I think the power to educate, to bring people together, to sort of expose to all of us our humanity, that we're on the same team, is pretty powerful. You can see this at the end of the movie when the cops come together and everybody's changed. You know, everybody sort of sees, understands each other's perspectives. We tend to sort of isolate in our bubbles as people and sort of dehumanize, you know, people when we're not, you know, integrated. And sports kind of brings that together. I think it's a microcosm for life. And ironically, in this day and age, when we have so much technology bring us together, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, texts, you know, you'll see people at a dinner table, a family, and everyone's on their phone. They're there, but they might as well be in a different planet. So I think sport sort of brings us back to basics. It brings us together, and effectively it just sort of gets us in the same room and have a conversation like, oh, hey, you guys aren't so bad. We're all kind of on the same team. All of our differences, whether, you know, we worship a different God or have a different color of skin, that's just like all superficial. And so I think those sort of 2 points is the power of sport to bring together and the power of sport to influence all of our lives, whether it's trying to win a national championship at Harvard, become an Olympian, or just get into a boat because you don't know how to swim and you know, and that's a big deal. So we all have the sport, there's something here for everyone. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think that I felt it was very important to tell this story because just around sort of access, we all know that rowing has the power to change lives, but if people can't get into a boathouse, they're never going to get, you know, that life is not going to change. So it's so important. And that starts with both, obviously,
physical access, but also just making people aware that this sport is for anybody. And I think a lot of times when people think of sport, or let's say transporting out of a bad situation or a tough neighborhood, we tend to sort of think of the classic sports like basketball or football as ways to sort of get scholarships out to college, and then maybe if you're good enough to get into a professional league. But there's only so many basketball players and football players, and rowing offers another opportunity for many more athletes to do something that really changes their lives. And it's not impact, right? So you're not really hurting your body physically or mentally. We see that with football. And quite frankly, people don't row. There's no sort of pretense that you're going to get paid a lot of money. You do it because you love it and you love the work. And that really resonates with you. And so sort of there's only one Michael Jordan, there's only one Tiger Woods and one LeBron James. Obviously, you know, for most people, sport is not going to be a profession or a way of life, but it, you know, in the case of rowing, even one semester, going to, you know, a season in high school, that can change your life. So I think awareness is a really big thing for me, and allowing people to understand that rowing's for everybody. It may have a history in the Ivy League, and it may be a sport of privilege, but I think that ultimately it's for everyone. And for our sport to continue to grow and stay super relevant, it has to sort of change, and we have to kind of continue to bring in all kinds of people into the sport. So I think when Mary was saying about the West Side, yeah, I never thought that there was a rowing team on the West Side. And when we learned about it, we're like, oh my God, this story has to get out there. It's so powerful.
Thank you. Really appreciate hearing about rowing through kind of the lens of accessibility and the potential for change. So thank you.
Yeah, I think you guys make a really good point about kind of one of the struggles of getting people to row is all of the barriers to entry, whether that be, you know, the price of a boat, the price of oars, or just the location of finding water, because I know that's been a big struggle in my, you know, hometown community of Sarasota. I was just saying, you know, I went to a high school that was about a mile away from the boathouse, and that led to about 80% of the people in my high school have rowed at some point in their time, which, you know, a lot of people don't have that opportunity. So I really like those answers. So I have a question that I guess is a little bit different for each of you, each of our panelists, but applies to all. And it's what were the surprise challenges about, you know, asking Mary this movie specifically, because I know she's made multiple, or with Arshay and Tyler and Cameron, what were some surprises or unexpected hurdles that you had to overcome with making this movie?
I'd like to start because when we decided we were going to move forward with this film, Arshay said, okay, come to Chicago and don't bring your ratty ass, you know, Boston Red Sox hat. Bring another hat. So I show up in an unmarked hat, and he puts me in the car and Alvin's driving. And Arshay, I don't know if you remember this, you put on Walk With Me by D.A. Smart, and we start driving to the West Side. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm on a journey. Where are we going? And I said to Alvin, I said, you'll let me know if I need to like duck down, right? If we're going to go down any place where it's going to be really unsafe, like I'm up for it, but tell me when to duck. And he said, Mary, we're not going to take you down any street that we're afraid to go down. I said, uh-oh, okay, here we go. And we started at Arshay's home on the West Side, and we drove to school. And Arshay is pointing out the new breeds. Block 1, 2 blocks over are the gangster disciples. 3 blocks over are the conservative vice lords. 4 blocks over are the extreme conservative vice lords. It was extraordinary for me, not being from a neighborhood, even though I've worked in neighborhoods like this over the course of my career, to see the topography of what people, young people, have to navigate on a daily basis to get to school. And Arshay said, oh, let me show you the other way we get to school, which was slightly less treacherous. And there we passed, you know, 6, 8, 12 different blocks with different territorial aspects. And I remember saying to Arshay, I'm like, so how did you get to school safely? And he said, you know, ding, 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 like, wrong answer, wrong question, right question. There was no safe way to get to school. And so to be acquainted with the topography in the way that Arshay and Alvin had just extraordinary generosity of spirit to enlighten, right, this journey we were going on, it all of a sudden clicked in my mind that the idea of a young man affiliating with a gang, which many young men and young women, girls and boys, are making these decisions at the ages of 9, 10, and 11, and they're doing it to survive. It is not a choice. And so that was one of the things I think that really blew me away. The second piece that really most surprised me was the intergenerational nature of trauma. And I didn't know, and Arshay, you can comment on this, I didn't know what we were in for. But when we started interviewing Arshay's mother, Malcolm's mother, Pookie's mother, the idea that white domestic terrorism, let's call it what it is, right? Like people call it slavery. That is one generation away, maybe two. And when Malcolm's mother, Blanche, said, well, yes, I was growing up on a plantation and men would be on horses chasing us with rifles. That's when it occurred to me, this isn't something that happened 400, 300, 400 years ago. This is happening in real time. And there's new research around trauma that untreated PTSD is now passed down epigenetically and genetically. What does this mean? This trauma that has been inflicted over the course of 400 years is so debilitating, and that the greater we, and I mean we, whether it's our forebears, created these conditions that have led to where we are today. So I'd say those two things were really eye-opening. And remember, I have been doing work in these neighborhoods. So I think those two things really blew me away.
Yeah, I think to just add on like the challenge with the film, and we don't talk about this in the film, but it kind of just, brought back a lot of memories of how, first of all, how tough the guys are and was many years ago, that, these guys, will travel an hour and a half on a bus every day to go to the boathouse, that no matter what they was going through at home, it was rough. Or when they walk out of their doors, or being laughed at school because we on the crew team, or being stared at a regatta, or traveling to regatta and, trying to go into a gas station, we're asked to come in one at a time because they think we may steal something. Like, regardless of that, they showed up and they grind, right? And when we came back 22 years later and we started training, right? It was rough because they had some serious health issues, but still trained. We had someone who had a heart murmur. We had someone who was basically had a surgery in the middle of training, right? And didn't want to tell Mary because he wanted to show up, right? And he didn't want to lose his seat, And then Malcolm, who recovered from cancer, right? And so a lot of health issues, but these guys were so gritty, and Rowan teaches you to go after it. And we had a lot of obstacles training, and we all lived in different cities. So when the camera was around, that's the time we had to put our training in, but just brought back so many memories of how resilient, how tough these young people are. And there's so many more of them out there that are 15, 16 years old. So that was a big challenge, but we fought through it, because we're rowers. And I think that was just an awesome experience.
Yeah, so Cameron and I had the easy job. I wish we could take credit for some of the filmmaking, but effectively, all we did was really write a check to support this. But the only hard decision there was when Arshay said, hey, I got a filmmaker who wants to make this story. You're thinking there's so many people, there's such a wide range of filmmakers. Some are really good, some are really bad. But Mary is an easy decision. We saw her work. She's a rower, total winner. So it was an easy bet. But that was the only concern is, what's this thing going to look like? Who's behind the camera? Would they understand the sport? Would they understand the story? Is their heart in the right place? Are they there for the right reasons? And of course, the answer was yes. But so that was basically our decision and our role in this so far.
Well, and what Tyler and Cameron will not tell you is that the film would not have been made without the both of them, pure and simple. So, so you may think the job was easy, my friends, but critically and crucially important. And honestly, it's a team win for the impact that we're seeing in real time, really before the film is fully out. So thank you both.
Yeah, and I want
Thanks,
to add
Mary.
to that, like, they're not just writing checks, the moment I met these guys, man, I mean, I sat in their office for hours and we had lunch talking about diversity in the sport, what we can do, what can we do working with boarding schools. I've seen them at Row New York events along with them and David Banks and many others. They've been honored at Row New York. I've seen pictures from years ago of them showing up at events. So they do a lot more than that. I mean, you guys are great. And I mean, every conversation we had is around how can we push this movement forward, making sure that, that the sport can reflect the diversity in our country. So I appreciate that.
And it's also worth noting that we began this exercise 2 years ago. And even though the film is, a lot of critics have remarked how resonant it is today, we believe it was resonant when we started 2 years ago. But I think it's important to just mention that the support, Tyler, Cameron, for sure, that this was long before the events of the last 12 weeks. And I think that's just an important data point.
Yeah, we're super honored and happy to have taken part and played our part. And I think that film financing is probably one of the riskiest investments in the planet. And I say that under the lens of being a early venture technology investor, where the average sort of 9 out of 10 companies tend to fail and quickly. And so a lot of this, when you look at a project like this, you have to go by instinct and feel. And having gotten to know Arshay and then meeting Mary, I think we just felt super great about what was going to happen 2 years ago when we saw it or first sort of started thinking about it. And I don't think the end result could have been better. I'm just sort of so blown away. And I think the sort of the raw aspect, how real Arshay, you and your teammates all are, I think that's, both a testament to you and also Mary and your storytelling and how you kind of brought that all out. So it's a really beautiful, phenomenal piece. And I think that, we're just super excited about that.
Thank you, guys. Those were all really great answers. I didn't even think about how different the movie would have been if the director was not a rower herself or himself. I honestly cannot even imagine, well, actually, I can't imagine a rowing movie where the director does not know rowing and it's not super. So didn't think about that, or I guess what I would call the learning curve of being dropped in the west side of Chicago with Arshay, but still being taken totally out of your element to film something like that. It's pretty crazy to think about.
I'll just tell you how it would have been if it wasn't a rower. I'd be like, yeah, we only have to go down the course one time and it's all good. We don't have, we went maybe, it's like, so many meters we put in daily, I would have been like, no, we go out at 10 o'clock, just one time around, we good. But yeah, but Mary didn't allow that to happen.
Yeah, I don't think Mike Tatey would have let that happen either. After I'm for him for a year, but
honestly,
you might have gone up a little easier.
Exactly. When we started this, in my mind, I was like, what a story. Maybe at the end of the movie, we can get Arshay and Alvin and Pookie and Preston out on the water. It's flat. You sing Kumbaya, fade to black. Right. And honestly, this was part of around every corner was a surprise with Arshay Cooper. And when they decided to get together again to row, and everyone had a profoundly different reason. I mean, the hair on the back of my like neck started to go up, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then I was like, do you guys know how hard, like, are you ready? This is going to be brutal. Like, I still race as a master's rower, and it is just the grind, right? And Arshay, you were like, yeah. And Malcolm was like, I'm getting a trainer. And Alvin was like, I've already started lifting. And he starts, and so what a remarkable effort, I think everybody, all of you guys really displayed. Really amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for those thoughtful answers. I think it's just so interesting to kind of hear more about the process of the filmmaking too. I think one thing that's really stuck with me, Arshay, I was reading an interview that you did with Sports Illustrated a few weeks back, and one piece of it, you said it wasn't about being a fast boat, it was really about being a great human first and contributing to our community, and then fast boats. And I think when we're speaking to an audience of kind of these elite collegiate rowers, Harvard institution, we have, pretty high level coaches and national team members. I think a lot of us have felt like the goal of sport is winning. Like, it can be a very kind of narrow focus. And I'm curious kind of what you think is there kind of the responsibility of coaches, of athletes, and institutions in creating great humans that contribute to community, that also just pursue sport, and how that kind of ties into widening access to rowing as well.
Yeah, great question. I think that, sometimes, and it's good, our sport, we measure success by winning and getting that gold medal. And that's great. In the 90s, it was hard to get there because of so much we was dealing with outside of the boat, right? And I think that we had to understand that that's not the only win, right? Especially when you're working with a group of young people that's going through so much of what they're going through. So we learned that what the city of Chicago is trying to accomplish and what's hard to accomplish was something that we accomplished through the sport. Getting over the fear of water culturally was a win, a big win. Allowing these guys from different neighborhoods who did not like each other to get along and become a brotherhood is a huge win, right? Showing up every day at the boathouse is a win. Getting into a foreign sport and racing is a win. So I think, measuring success on those kind of wins are the wins that I think that really changes the world and changes the community. So I think that when it comes to coaching, that the lessons, for me, the lessons outside of the boat must be coached with more energy and enthusiasm as the lessons inside the boat, right? That number one lesson is to go after it, right? No matter what, get in there and go after it. And for me, it's like, okay, I took that lesson and learned that, okay, if there's a disconnect with gangs in the neighborhood, I'm going to spend my life working in a nonprofit trying to fix it. And I did that in Chicago. If there's a disconnect between the Black community and the police, I'm going to go after it and I'm going to figure it out. If I want this book to become a film, I'm going to go after it and I'm going to figure it out. And that was our attitude. And also leaving the boathouse better than we found it. A simple lesson: clean up behind yourself, right? Wash your boat, right? Fix things, right? And outside of that, that lesson was preached to leave the world, leave your community, leave your classroom, leave your teammate, leave your stroke better than you found it, right? And we took that lesson on, right? Becoming an ally, right? And acting beyond yourself for your teammates, that we had to learn how to pull for each other. And that was a really great lesson we learned in the boat, but outside the boat, that was taught. And I showed up at Alvin House every day because I learned to pull for him, learn to have his back, right? When someone's going through something, we have to be there for each other. If we have one person of color on our team and George Floyd was murdered, we have to be there for that person because they experienced maybe a level of trauma that we don't know, right? That we haven't seen, right? If one person of color on our team and they go to the multicultural events on campus, we should be a part of that to learn, to understand, right? So those lessons are so important outside the boat that we learn inside the boat. And it's also the the lesson of just catching a crab, right? Like we were taught not, even though I caught many crabs, I was taught not to catch a crab. But what I learned from it is outside of the boat that crabs happen, right? Things like COVID. COVID came and it interrupt our whole season, right? But as rowers, we're trained to either lay back, let it pass, and come back and recover, or fight through it. When things happen, like George Floyd was murdered, when that crab hit, listen, we got together with friends and we fought. We learned how to fight. We have to fight through these things. And these are all the lessons, so many great lessons that we learn in the sport. But it also, we have to take those lessons and use it outside of the world, right? And become open and build a connection and hold each other accountable with things that are said that shouldn't be said, with things that are allowed that shouldn't be allowed, right? And that kind of environment, that kind of culture creates great humans. That kind of environment makes people feel welcome. And I think that that's what changed the world, taking the lessons serious inside the boat and outside of the boat.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I love that message. For all the rowers who are undergrads listening, you guys think you're going to the boathouse to learn how to row, but you're really learning about life. And in my example or experience, I started rowing at 15. Cameron and I started rowing at 15. We stopped rowing about 30. Ultimately, we went on to found a company that has 300 people, which we lead today. We never had a traditional job experience working for a company. So how is it that we're able to build this team of 300 brilliant people and lead it well? It all goes back to our experience in sport. That's our only credentials. That's our only experience to draw on. It's the example we saw in the boathouse from coaches like Harry Parker, Charlie Butt, Mike Tady of the national team, Ted Nash, of leadership, of real leadership. Being on a team, the hard work, the accountability, the long game of training for years to maybe get a shot at a medal. So all of the perseverance, all of that grit, that can't be taught in a textbook. And of course we learn things in the classroom, but really what we call on today as entrepreneurs and as business leaders has 100% to do with what we learned in the boathouse. And yes, ostensibly it was about rowing, but it really was these universal lessons of life that we carry with us every day. So I love the sport because it is a microcosm of the world, and it teaches you the lessons and gives you the tools to succeed in the world, whether it's to become an entrepreneur, Arshay to become a chef, an author, a motivational speaker. It all starts in the boathouse, learning how to move that boat faster. Yeah, I think it's when you're in college and in the thick of it, it really does seem like winning is probably the most important thing. And maybe it was at that time to some extent for me, but sort of that's when you're kind of looking at the trees. But when you sort of leave the sport, and you all will sooner or later at some point, even though it may not seem like that at present, and see sort of the forest, you realize that most of the learning, really, to Tyler's point, wasn't really about rowing. It's about really life. And those are the greatest lessons. And we had such great teachers and such good mentors. And you don't really realize it until you go into other situations. And you realize that, sometimes integrity and all that teamwork and all those things aren't always a given or default. And you think back to the boathouse and you're like, wow, that was just such an incredible environment. And you know what, if I could recreate that environment, that type of environment where people are pulling together in the company that I'm building, that would be incredibly powerful. We're going to go on and do amazing things. And then what if we could extend that beyond our company into our community, which is what Arshay's been doing for many years. That's super powerful. And then what if we can take that at scale and bring it to, the country or people around the world? And that's what Mary's doing with this film. How powerful would that be? So I just sort of love how this all kind of started
in a boathouse, and it could be a really humble boathouse. It doesn't have to be, you know, a great boathouse. And anybody who's been in the Harvard in Newell, it's a brilliant old building with tons of heritage, but it's not, you know, the best facility in the world. I mean, we kicked the butts of people who had facilities like 10 times as good as us. It has nothing to do with the facility or the equipment. And I love how so much of why we're all here, it sort of starts in this, you know, in a boathouse, you know, pulling a piece, you know, an oar going backwards, but it can have sort of that butterfly effect, that profound impact where one stroke in the West Side can sort of multiply over the last 20 years to where we're here now, and Arshay's out there leading and being a voice in a conversation that is so important, and it's going to change lives, and change the conversation. So that's what I get excited in, and it's not always obvious in the present, but you will see it eventually. Speaking from a person who's in his, you know, just turned 39, eventually you will see it.
If I can piggyback off of that comment, we're seeing, and I'm seeing in real time, Arshay Cooper change hearts and minds. We are seeing unprecedented philanthropy sort of in the wake of this project. And, you know, I think, Arshay, I think we were on with the Princeton class of 52 maybe, right? And what was so exciting about that was, listen, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, you know, you have our country, captains of industry have often been at Harvard or Yale or Princeton and really have access to the levers of power. And many of them have picked up an oar. And, you know, we're so alike, right? Like one rower is like another rower. And so to see people who have lived in the world of privilege react, hear Arshay's story and say, what more can I do, is really, really exciting. But you guys are the vanguard, right? I mean, you have seen the events play out over the past 6, 8, 12 weeks. You have seen the profound injustice in this country, and we need you to go fix it. You're the next generation. You've been in a boat. You understand that we all need to be in the same boat. We're interdependent, right? We're only as strong as our weakest link. And we need you and your energy and your privilege to be in service to others in ways that I think my generation, that we haven't cracked the code on, and you guys are going to be the leaders on this. And I think we're very excited to see what you're going to do.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's just fantastic. I think it has been such a kind of transformational summer, I think, for a lot of us, and thinking about the ways that we can really serve. And I think being in places like Harvard that are just so steeped in privilege is just a really necessary call to action, I think. And I'm grateful for all your thoughts on that. I think we have about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to get one question in. I know a big feature of the film was your relationship with the Chicago Police Department and kind of building those personal relationships. But I think as we're seeing, there's such a systemic change needed, especially now we have another phase of unrest in Wisconsin. And I'm curious, Arshay, what you're thinking about, and others, what kind of systemic reform do you think is necessary within policing, within the criminal justice system, to create truly safer neighborhoods? I know that is a big question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, you know, of course, Arshay Cooper has changed hearts and minds, but there's a lot of policies that need to be changed, right? You know, there's bad cops that shouldn't be out there, right? And there's unions that protect them, right? And I think simple, you know, when you kill the unarmed hurt Black man or woman or anybody, that a cop should be convicted, you know, not only fired, but, you know, go to jail, right? And there's so many policies. I can talk more about policies that need to be changed, and police accountability and police reform. And that has taken so long to even, now we see in a movement out there that's really bringing this out to light. And we have, iPhones everywhere. It is so much change that needs to happen. And I believe the more we fight that those policies will change. But for me, and I saw one of the questions was like, do I still talk to the cops? And for me, when I'm thinking about this, I know that there's so many people are fighting to change these policies. But when you live on the west side of Chicago and you're there every day, the immediate response is that the disconnect is so bad that we have to have a conversation. That's the immediate response, right? And that I know at times that if you have a bullhorn, or if maybe I mailed them my book, or maybe I march in front of the police station, that maybe they won't hear me. So one thing I do know is that sports unites people, right? And sports give people opportunity to have a conversation, not racing against, but racing with. And so when I invited them out, I wanted to give them an interaction that they never had. The interaction is maybe pulling someone over, someone calling the cops on someone. And, and what was important to me is that they know the names of the people who live in this community. We work 8 hours a day. We need to learn names. And if you can learn names, it will stop us from posting, say their name. And you are a part of this village, and we need the whole village to raise a child. And so, what they learned, right? What they learned is the same things that we learned. And as a teacher, you will forget some of your students, but as a student, you never forget your teacher. And we were the teachers. And every day they showed up, right, to train with us, to learn the lessons I talked about was the lessons I talked about as we taught them in the tanks, as they showed up every day. That scene with the guys and their sons, the cops was there for that. They sat through that. They watched that. They saw the interaction. They saw how much these Black men love their kids. They saw that these Black men are entrepreneurs, that they contribute to their community. They learned every day that Preston wears a hoodie and sag his pants like most kids, but he is an amazing guy who's a great entrepreneur and give opportunities for kids on the west side of Chicago. They saw that Alvin is so committed, that he's so loyal, that he's not a criminal, right? He didn't make bad choices, but he made hard choices. And those are choices that we have to make every day on the west side of Chicago. They saw that Malcolm called his son every 10 minutes because men there on the west side of Chicago care about their kids. And I had to give them this experience. And we did create a bond, right? And there are bad cops that really made my life miserable as a young person, but those guys were good guys. And what we need is those guys holding those bad guys accountable, right? The same way every day, me and many people who look like me show up on the west side to start the programs to hold these guys in the neighborhood accountable for what they're doing. And I think that's the way of moving forward. So when George Floyd was murdered, I talked to 3 out of 4 of the cops, right? I had one cop message me like, I feel the pain in the community. I had one cop show me a picture, Mike, of him working with the Black leaders in Chicago to talk more about the relationship in this community. I have a call after watching the news today and what's going on in Wisconsin. I have a call with one of the cops tomorrow. I reached out in a group message, Mary don't know this, and we're going to organize a Zoom with just us and those cops, and we're going to have a conversation, right? And it doesn't change the system, but it's a start, and there's so much work to be done, and there's so many different movements out there, right? Just like in the 60s, there was Malcolm X, there was the King movement, there was the Black Panthers movement, there was the way James Baldwin did things, there was the NAACP. They all had the same goal, right? And done things a little differently. And my gift and my way is to unite people through sports and have a conversation to give them an experience and help them to understand trauma in a way that maybe they wasn't taught through their leaders, right? And I think that is slowly happening, right? And I'm still moving the boat, right? And we're having another conversation, and I think training is important. But I would say this, through my vision and Mary's vision, I think they learned a lot about the West Side and trauma, even through watching the film, even through sitting in that boat every day, even through stretching, that they have never learned or would not have learned through the police force. And and that's my way. And I'm gonna continue to do what I have to do to hopefully bridge this gap on the west side of Chicago.
Yeah, I'd say two things. Like the concept of equity in a sport like rowing is so obvious and fundamental. An 8 is only as fast as its weakest rower, and if someone's struggling technically or with fitness, everybody in the boat wants that person to get extra coaching or get extra help, because it's all about pulling that person along. Maybe they're injured, maybe they're having a bad day, they're sick. And so from my perspective, if there's a group of people that are struggling or in trouble, we must help them and bring them along so that they don't get, further into trouble. And I think that concept to me is really important when I think of what's going on and really the Black experience in America. We have to do better, and we have to make that better for the children on the West Side and everywhere else where they're in trouble and in a traumatic environment. And that's very fundamental. In sport, there's no question. And sometimes people sort of lose sight of that when you leave the realm of sport and just think about humanity. But really, this is a humanitarian issue that we're dealing with. And then the second thing is, when I think of an organization, a high-performing organization like a police department or a police force, the vast majority of those professionals, they're great, and they want to be the best in the world at what they do, and they want to help people. So it makes sense that you have to have accountability, and the low performers have to be exited. Just like if you lose your seat race on the team, you don't make the boat, or you lose a race and the coach changes up the lineup, and if you keep losing and you don't show up to practice, or you get into issues with your teammates, you're off the team, you're off the boat. We take that for granted in some ways. It's so fundamental to how we grew up in sport, and how we think about the world. And I think those principles, they're tried and true, and we need to sort of apply them to policing and other organizations. And I think we'll get results that that we want. So those are the two things that I would say.
Yeah, and I would agree with that a lot. I think obviously police reform, if you look at the most elite forces, like the Navy SEALs, the amount of training they do per deployment into a mission, they might train for a year for 6 months of actually in the field action. And if you think of a rower, how much you train for a 7-minute race, you train all year for 5 7-minute races, right? And I think police training is the ratio of training to actually in the field is like, I don't know, 10, 20 hours. I don't know the exact numbers for the entire year. So that ratio, and there's many other issues, but I think that's just sort of a basic one of sort of the standards of what it means to be in there and wield that force and that power. I think also like our approach as a society to issues needs to change. This idea of getting tough on crime, militarizing police forces, the war on drugs, this idea that throwing people in cages will solve their problems, that mentality has to change. The opioid crisis or any drug issues, that's a health crisis. With the health crisis, you get people the right help. It could be an opportunity to get into a rowing boat to change their mentality. It could be professionally counseling, education. It could be trauma counselors. All of these things, it's sort of the way we would approach like a cancer patient. We would treat them much differently. We wouldn't throw them in a cage. I think people inherently are good. They want to do the right thing. And I think that ultimately the majority of people who are incarcerated right now have a mental health issue. And we need to approach that. We have to acknowledge that and approach it how we'd approach any health issue in crisis. We wouldn't dehumanize, we wouldn't criminalize, we wouldn't brand people as felons, and we wouldn't ultimately incarcerate and marginalize a huge part of society. And if you look at the numbers, like mass incarceration is very much like the new Jim Crow. And so that needs to end. Our whole mentality, the stigma, the approach We can't take like this heavy-handed thing. We tried that. It's been happening for the last 40 years. We totally got it wrong. And now we need to find ways for people to heal and grow and just get healthy.
Great, thank you. I think you touch on so many points there about mental health in prisons. I think there's a statistic now that the #1 mental health facility in the U.S. is the Cook County Jail in Chicago. So we just have such a fundamental lack of access there too. But thank you all for joining us. I think we've just about reached time. I've learned so much, and I'm so glad that we got to hear from you directly. It's such an honor. Thank you also to the Friends of Harvard Rowing for helping us coordinate together, and Andrew and Trevor as well. It's been a great night. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.